331 thousandths of a second. That is what separated Lewis Hamilton from pole position at Zandvoort, in a Ferrari carrying the biggest aerodynamic change the team has made since Barcelona. On a circuit the whole paddock expected to suit it, and the flaw is not the reason. Start with the contradiction, because it is sitting in the timing sheets from the same weekend, 24 hours apart. Saturday afternoon, the sprint. Charles Leclerc was the only car at the front to start on the soft compound. He passed Lando Norris into turn 1 for second place, and then held George Russell's pace to the flag over 24 laps. That is a Ferrari matching the fastest car on track over a race distance on the softest tyre available with nowhere to hide. Saturday evening, qualifying for the Grand Prix. Norris took pole with a 1 minute 11.163. Russell was 102 thousandths back. Kimi Antonelli third, Oscar Piastri fourth, Hamilton fifth at 331 thousandths, Leclerc sixth at 395, and all Ferrari third row more than 3/10 from the front, at a track where overtaking's close to impossible. Same car, same floor, same tyres available, a few hours apart. If the upgrade had failed, both of those sessions would look bad. Only one of them does, so the failure is somewhere else, and the whole point of this video is to find where. Here is the document. Ferrari filed a technical declaration with the FIA for the Dutch Grand Prix, listing 5 new components on the SF26. Floor body, floorboard, floor edge, diffuser, beam wing. For scale on that number, Alpine declared 8 items, Mercedes declared 1, Red Bull declared 1, and Williams, Racing Bulls, Haas, Audi and Cadillac declared nothing at all. Ferrari brought the second largest package of the weekend and the largest among the front runners. The declared objective, in the team's own wording, is a global increase in aerodynamic load across the entire operating range, together with improved robustness of the underlying flow mechanisms, enhanced flow topology, and greater flow energy delivered to the rear diffuser. Notice what that sentence does not promise. It does not promise peak downforce. It promises load that holds up across a range and flow structures that stay attached when conditions move. That is a stability claim, not a maximum claim, and it predicts exactly the sprint result and exactly the qualifying result. A part built to widen a window pays you back over a stint, where the car is constantly moving through that window as fuel burns off. It pays you almost nothing on one lap with low fuel and a fresh tyre, because on that lap you are sitting at the optimum anyway. Hold that distinction. It is the whole video, and it comes back at the end with a number attached. The evidence that the floor did its job is not just Leclerc's sprint. Hamilton was fourth in the only free practice session, 190 thousandths off Antonelli, with Leclerc fifth at 289. Ferrari looked strong on the long runs in that session, and noticeably weaker on the soft tyre single lap simulations at the end of it. That pattern showed up on Friday, showed up again on Saturday afternoon, and showed up again on Saturday evening. 3 separate sessions, 1 consistent signature. And Andrea Stella at McLaren, who spent many years at Ferrari before that, said publicly that he thought the SF26 might have the strongest race pace of the leading cars. If you want the version of this channel where the regulation gets read out by article number, subscribing is how you get it. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because I keep being surprised by the answer. So here is what the part actually does, and then we go looking for the real culprit. A modern Formula 1 floor makes downforce by pulling air through a narrowing gap between the underside of the car and the road. The tighter that gap, the faster the air. The lower the pressure, the more the car is sucked down. That works beautifully right up to the point where the flow separates from the surface, at which point the load does not decay gently, it falls off a cliff. Every floor therefore has a window. Too high, not enough suction. Too low, stall. The car's ride height moves inside that window constantly, with fuel load, with braking, with the banking through turn 3 and turn 14 at this circuit in particular. Ferrari's changes are all aimed at the edges of that window rather than its centre. At the inlet they kept the double entry architecture and split the channels with a horizontal strake. Outboard they widened the lateral floor edge, inlet inside the legality volume the regulations permit there. At the front, they went back to the 3-element bargeboard arrangement first run in Barcelona, with the outermost fence shortened and suspended above the floor rather than running down to it, which lets the wheel wake pass underneath rather than piling up against it. Then the diffuser ramp and internal fences were reshaped to handle the extra flow energy the floor was now delivering, and the beam wing flap was given a more twisted profile near the rear crash structure to work with it. Think of it like a workshop vacuum with a worn seal. Press it flat and it grips. Lift it a millimetre and it lets go all at once. What Ferrari built here is a better seal, so that lifting it a millimetre cost you a little instead of costing you everything. 3 questions, and I will answer each one immediately. Did that seal get better? On the evidence, yes. Long run pace on Friday, a sprint where Leclerc held Russell's rhythm, and on Sunday the fastest lap of the Grand Prix, a 1 minute 14.230 on lap 60, set by a Ferrari. Then why 5th and 6th? Because a qualifying lap does not test the seal. It tests whether you can put temperature and pressure into a soft tyre in a single flying lap. And why did Ferrari fail that test? That is the rest of this video. And there are 2 mechanisms, not 1. Before the mechanisms, a comparison from the same weekend that shows how far Ferrari is from being able to answer this question publicly. Alpine brought the biggest package of anyone, 8 items, and fitted it only to Pierre Gasly's car, while Franco Colapinto stayed on the older specification. That gave Alpine a direct back-to-back on the same afternoon, and their managing director Steve Nielson said the upgrade was worth most of the 719 thousandths that separated the 2 cars in the second sprint qualifying segment. Ferrari put the new floor on both cars and left it off both cars in the single practice session because rain was threatening. So Ferrari's first meaningful data on its own upgrade arrived under competitive conditions in Parc Fermé with no baseline to compare against. Alpine can tell you what its part is worth, Ferrari cannot, and that is a consequence of how the weekend was run, not of how the part performs. So, straight question for the comments, and I want a side. Split the cars for a proper back-to-back, or put the upgrade on both and accept you will never know the number. Like this video for splitting, comment for both cars. Subscribe while you are down there. Now, the first mechanism, and this is the one almost every report yesterday skipped over. Pirelli brought the C2, C3 and C4 compounds here. The C4, the soft, is the one that decides qualifying, and a tyre only makes its peak grip inside a narrow band of surface and bulk temperature. Get it right and the lap is there. Come in 10 degrees cold and the first corner is a slide, and a slide at turn 1 at Zandvoort has consequences all the way down the lap, because the banking loads the tyre progressively, rather than giving you a braking zone to recover in. You have 1 flying lap and 1 out lap to get that temperature in. The out lap is your only tool. You are managing brake temperature, carcass temperature, and surface temperature simultaneously, and they do not respond at the same rate. Here is where the circuit works against a car like this. Zandvoort is 4.259 kilometres of near continuous corners with very few heavy braking zones. Heavy braking is what heats brakes, and hot brakes are what heat the wheel rim, and the rim is what carries heat into the tyre carcass from the inside. Take the braking events away, and you lose the most reliable heating mechanism you have. What you are left with is energy put into the tyre through the contact patch by cornering, and that depends on how much load the car is putting through it, which is where the 2 halves join up in an uncomfortable way. A car set up for a wide, stable operating window over a stint is a car that is deliberately not sitting at its most aggressive ride height. It is a more forgiving platform. A more forgiving platform slides less, works the tyre surface less, and therefore puts less heat into it on an outlap. The same characteristic that made Leclerc's sprint stint possible is the characteristic that made the soft harder to switch on. And conditions on Saturday evening pushed in exactly the same direction. The wind was building through qualifying, rain was circling the track, and the temperature came down compared with the sprint. Cooler air means less heat retained in the tyre between corners, and a rising wind means the aerodynamic balance moves from lap to lap, which is the thing a driver has to allow margin for. Vasseur's own read matches this. Speaking to Sky, he said Ferrari was 1 step behind McLaren that weekend, and that they were 1 or 2 tenths quicker depending on circumstances. Circumstances is doing real work in that sentence. He did not say the McLaren is faster. He said the gap moves. Now hold that number, 1 or 2 tenths, because the actual gap to pole was 331 thousandths, and the difference between those two figures is the second mechanism. The development history is worth putting in order here, because it explains why Ferrari was chasing window stability in the first place. Compare 3 weekends. At the Red Bull Ring, Leclerc qualified second and finished 8th, 45.659 seconds off the lead. At Silverstone 2 weeks later, Hamilton took sprint pole and Leclerc won the Grand Prix. In Hungary, Leclerc went from second on the grid to 4th, 23.840 seconds behind Norris. Same car, 3 completely different results. It was the comparison between Austria and Britain specifically, 2 circuits with close to opposite characteristics, that told Ferrari where it was losing. The team approved and produced this flaw before the mandatory shutdown, which ran from the 3rd to the 16th of August, meaning the decision was locked in before anyone left for the break. So the target was never peak downforce. The target was consistency across circuit types. Judged against that target, Zandvoort was a partial success, and judging it against a qualifying position is judging it against a brief it was never given. There is a second structural reason the third row happened, and it is the format. Zandvoort ran the sprint weekend. 1 free practice session, then straight into competitive running under Parc Fermé. Ferrari brought its largest aerodynamic change of the season to the 1 weekend in the calendar, where you have the least time to understand it, and then chose not to run it in the only hour where changing your mind was still legal. Whatever you think of that call, it is a regulation producing an outcome, not a mistake. Here is the question nobody asked yesterday. Everyone asked whether the upgrade worked. Nobody asked why Ferrari's tyre warm-up problem is worse on the soft than on the medium, when it is the same construction family and the same weekend. I do not have a published answer to that, and I am not going to invent one. What I can tell you is that the pattern is consistent, rather than random. Friday, strong long runs, weak soft simulations. Saturday afternoon, Leclerc excellent on a soft over 24 laps, which is a very different thing from 1 lap. Saturday evening, soft, 1 lap, 5th and 6th. A tyre that works once it is in and struggles to get in is a warm-up problem, not a grip problem, and those two things get confused constantly in race coverage. Stay with me for the second mechanism, because it is the one that puts a number on the ceiling. So physically, this is what changes when you go to a qualifying lap in a 2026 car. These cars carry a far larger electrical deployment than the previous generation, and that deployment is only as large as the energy you manage to recover. Recovery happens under braking. Zandvoort barely brakes. The harvest per lap here is small, which means the battery is being asked to fund straights it cannot fully pay for. Mercedes has been able to lean harder on burning fuel to charge the system. Ferrari has not been able to rely on that to the same extent, and has instead been clawing the deficit back through detailed energy management work, with the British Grand Prix and Spa as the 2 clearest cases where that work showed up in lap time. Now put a real number on what that costs at the end of a straight. After the race on Sunday, Hamilton said Ferrari was losing around 4 tenths a lap here, purely on the straights. He described coming out of turn 14, close to Russell, opening straight line mode, getting on the boost, and still not knowing whether he would clear the Mercedes, adding that he had watched a McLaren go past on power alone. That is a driver describing an energy budget, not an engine. And that is why the answer is not the flaw. Follow it through. If the flaw were the problem, Ferrari would have been slow in the sprint, slow on the long runs, and slow on Sunday. Instead, Ferrari was quick in all 3, and slow in exactly 1 session type. A flaw does not know what session it is in. A tyre warm-up window and a battery state of charge absolutely do. And here is the sum that closes it. Vasseur put McLaren 1 to 2 tenths ahead on pure pace. The actual gap was 331 thousandths. The difference between those two figures, somewhere between 1 and 2 tenths, is what the soft tyre and the energy state cost on top of the underlying deficit. Every one of those tenths comes from something the new flaw was never designed to fix. I am giving you that as a range and not a single value, because it is a subtraction between a quoted estimate and a measured gap, and precision I have not earned is worth nothing. Every solution charges somewhere, and here the bill arrives twice. The wider window that made Ferrari strong over a stint made the car more forgiving, and a more forgiving car puts less energy into a cold, soft tyre on an outlap. Then, because you qualified 5th and 6th, you are forced into aggressive strategy on Sunday, which is precisely what created the situation where Hamilton ended up behind his own teammate. The qualifying result is not a separate problem from the race result. It is the first link in the same chain. The strongest argument against everything I've said is this. You can explain almost any bad qualifying with tyre warm-up, because it is unfalsifiable from outside the garage. Ferrari lost 3/10 in a session where the wind was rising and rain was circling. Perhaps this was simply two drivers not putting a clean lap together in tricky conditions, and the entire tyre and energy explanation is a story built on top of noise. I think the Friday data breaks that argument, because the soft weakness was visible before the wind arrived and before the pressure of a qualifying session. But I will be honest about the ceiling on my confidence here. I have not seen Ferrari's tyre surface temperature traces, and without those I am reading the shape of the problem rather than measuring it. So the reading. The floor did what the declaration said it would do, and the proof is that a Ferrari matched the fastest car on track over a sprint distance and set the fastest lap of the Grand Prix. What Ferrari did not fix, because it never set out to fix it, is a car that cannot put temperature into a soft tyre in one lap at a circuit with almost no braking, while running an energy budget it cannot fill. 331 thousandths off pole is not the verdict on the upgrade. It is the invoice for two problems the upgrade was never addressed to. Second question, and I want a name rather than a mood. Tyre warm-up or energy deployment? Which one costs Ferrari more between now and the end of the season? Pick one and defend it. If I stick my neck out, I do not expect this pattern to reverse at the next race, and I will be checkable on that on the 6th of September. Monza is the opposite circuit in every relevant way. Long straights, heavy braking zones, energy available to harvest. And it is where Ferrari's second homologation window opens for the updated power unit. If the car is still qualifying 3/10 off with those conditions in its favour, then the problem is deeper than a tyre window, and I will say so on camera. That breakdown is the next video before the cars run, so subscribe if you want it. Like this one, if the sprint against qualifying comparison was the bit that landed, until the next one,